Champagne always tastes like battery acid when you're pretending to be someone else. Nora swirled the pale, bubbling liquid in her flute, watching the distorted reflections of the ballroom stretch and snap against the crystal. The air in the grand foyer of the Beaumont Hotel was thick, practically heavy to the touch, laced with the cloying scent of roasted truffles, hot stage lights, and the metallic tang of desperate ambition. It was the annual winter gala for Arthur's firm, a sprawling mass of venture capitalists, tech executives, and the socialites who hovered around them like moths to a particularly lucrative flame. Her feet throbbed. The strappy black heels were a half size too small, bought on clearance 3 years ago, and the thin leather was biting into her heel with a sharp rhythmic sting. She shifted her weight, feeling the stiff polyester lining of her dark green dress rustle against her thighs. Arthur had hated the dress. He had stood in the doorway of their cramped bathroom an hour earlier, adjusting his heavy gold cufflinks, a purchase they couldn't afford, and frowned at her reflection in the mirror. "Is that what you're wearing?" he had asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. Nora took a small sip of the champagne. The acid burned the back of her throat. She looked across the room. Arthur was holding court near a towering ice sculpture of a swan that was already beginning to weep onto the white linen tablecloth. He was leaning in, nodding vigorously at something a bald, red-faced man was saying. Arthur's laugh drifted over the low hum of the string quartet. It was a practiced sound, 2 short barks followed by a wide, teeth-baring smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wiped his left palm against his tailored trousers. It was a nervous tic Nora knew intimately. He only did it when he felt out of his depth, when his bank account felt too small for the room he was standing in. Nora sighed a quiet exhalation that ruffled her bangs. She had fallen in love with Arthur because of that hunger. 6 years ago, when they met in a crowded, sticky-floored coffee shop downtown, his ambition had looked like passion. He had talked about building a life from scratch, about proving everyone wrong. He had felt raw, real. Nora had been craving real. She had spent her entire childhood suffocated by the sanitized silent halls of extreme wealth, surrounded by people who communicated in passive-aggressive checks and trust funds. She had walked away from the Hayes family estate with a suitcase and a burning desire to just be a normal person struggling alongside someone who loved her, for her, not for the digits attached to her surname. But somewhere along the line, Arthur's hunger had metastasized. It stopped being about building a life and started being about building an image. Fascinating, isn't it? Nora jumped slightly. A woman had drifted up beside her, smelling of expensive gardenias and gin. She was older, maybe late 50s, poured into a silver sequined gown that looked heavy enough to act as armor. "I'm sorry," Nora asked, trying to arrange her face into a polite, neutral expression. "The ecosystem," the woman said, waving a manicured hand toward the crowd. Heavy diamond bracelets clanked against her wrist. "You can always tell the ones who belong from the ones who are just visiting. The visitors always look so tense, like they're afraid someone's going to ask for their ticket." The woman's eyes flicked over Nora. It was a microscopic assessment, taking in the clearance rack shoes, the lack of a designer label on the clutch, the simple gold band on her finger. Nora felt a sudden hot prickle of shame at the base of her neck. She hated herself for feeling it. She knew rationally that the woman's opinion meant nothing. She knew she could buy and sell this entire ballroom if she picked up her phone and made one humiliating call. But the shame was a reflex conditioned by years of Arthur's constant quiet critiques. I suppose, Nora muttered, looking down at her glass. I'm Beatrice, the woman said, offering a hand. My husband owns the firm your husband is currently trying to squeeze for a promotion. Nora's stomach gave a dull lurch. Nora, Arthur's wife, Beatrice smiled. It was a thin, predatory thing. Ah, the wife. Tell me, Nora, does Arthur always sweat through his suits when he talks to senior management? Or is tonight a special occasion? Nora's jaw tightened. She wanted to say something sharp. She wanted to tell this woman to go to hell to defend the man she slept next to every night. But she looked over at Arthur. He was literally dabbing his forehead with a cocktail napkin, while the bald man, Beatrice's husband, apparently looked away bored. The reality of it stole the air from her lungs. He's very dedicated, Nora said the words, tasting like sawdust. Beatrice chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Dedication is what you call it when you don't have capital deer. Anyway, enjoy the ice sculpture before it melts. She drifted away, leaving Nora anchored to the floor, the pain in her heels suddenly unbearable. She needed air. She needed to sit down. She scanned the room for a quiet corner, a shadow to slip into, but the Beaumont was designed for exposure. Every wall was mirrored, every alcove bathed in warm, unforgiving light. She caught Arthur's eye across the room. He was looking right at her. For a split second, Nora hoped he would smile. A private shared glance between spouses drowning in a sea of sharks. Instead, his eyes widened slightly, his mouth pressing into a thin, hard line. He muttered something to the men he was with and began weaving through the crowd toward her. He wasn't walking to his wife. He was marching toward a problem. Arthur grabbed her elbow before he even fully stopped walking. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into the soft flesh just above the joint. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his voice pitched low, masked by a wide, rigid smile intended for anyone who might be watching. "Standing," Nora said, trying to pull her arm away. His cologne, a heavy, musky scent he had bought with their grocery money last month, was overpowering. "Let go, Arthur. You're pinching me." He loosened his grip marginally, but didn't let go physically, steering her toward the heavy velvet curtains that masked the entrance to the hallway. "You were talking to Beatrice Miller. What did you say to her?" "Nothing," Nora said, her voice rising in frustration. "She came up to me. She was making fun of you, actually, and I defended you." "You defended me," Arthur barked out, a harsh, incredulous whisper. They were in the hallway now, the heavy bass of the ballroom muffled behind the thick curtains. The air out here was significantly cooler, biting through the thin fabric of Nora's dress. "Do you have any idea who she is? You don't speak to her. You nod, you smile, and you excuse yourself. You don't have the vocabulary to spar with people like that." Nora stared at him. The hallway lights flickered slightly, casting long, harsh shadows across Arthur's face. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, his skin pale and slick with anxious sweat. He didn't look like the man she loved. He looked like a stranger having a panic attack in a rented tuxedo. "The vocabulary," Nora repeated the words, tasting sour. "Arthur, she's just a bored, rich woman. She's not a deity. She's the gatekeeper to the partnership, Nora." Arthur dragged a hand through his hair, messing up the careful, stiff styling. "God, you just don't get it. You never get it. You stand there in that depressing dress, looking like you'd rather be anywhere else, dragging me down." The knot in Nora's stomach pulled tight. It wasn't a sudden explosion of anger. It was a slow, sickening sink. "Dragging you down, I've supported you for 6 years. I worked double shifts at the clinic so you could take that unpaid internship. I stayed up until 3 a.m. proofreading your pitch decks." "That's in the past," Arthur snapped. "This is right now. This is the big leagues. And frankly, Nora—" He stopped looking away. His jaw worked nervously. "Frankly, what?" Nora demanded. Her voice cracked. She hated that it cracked. She wanted to be cold and stoic, but she just felt raw and exposed. "Say it." Arthur looked back at her, his eyes hardening. "Chloe Bingham is inside. Her father owns the largest logistics fleet on the East Coast. She's looking for a wealth manager. I've spent 3 weeks trying to get an introduction, and she's finally agreed to sit at my table for dinner." "Okay," Nora said slowly, confusion mixing with the dread. So it's a table of executives. It's high-level networking." Arthur swallowed hard. He couldn't meet her eyes anymore. He looked at the ugly patterned carpet of the hotel hallway. "She assumed I was single. The way she operates. She mixes business with, flirtation. It's just optics, Nora. It's just playing the game." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. Are you asking me to hide? I'm asking you to be a team player." Arthur pleaded, his tone shifting from angry to desperate. It was the tone of a cornered animal. "Just go home. I'll tell them you had a migraine. If you sit at that table looking miserable, not understanding the conversation, Chloe will lose interest. This is my shot, Nora. Please, don't ruin this for me." He was kicking her out. The absurdity of it washed over her, chilling her to the bone. He wasn't leaving her for another woman. He was casually erasing her from his life for the chance to impress a rich client with a flirtation. He was putting her in a taxi so he could pretend to be a wealthy, unattached bachelor. Nora didn't slap him. She didn't scream. That was for the movies. In reality, her mouth just went incredibly dry. She felt stupid, staggeringly, overwhelmingly stupid. She had traded her family's empire for a man who was now tossing her out of a hotel hallway for a crumb of the exact same world she had abandoned. "You want me to leave?" She stated, her voice remarkably flat. "I'll call you an Uber," Arthur said quickly, pulling his phone from his pocket, his relief palpable. It was the relief that broke her heart. He was glad to be rid of her. "I'll upgrade it to a black. You can order whatever you want on DoorDash when you get home. My treat." "Don't bother," Nora whispered. She turned away from him. The physical act of turning her back felt monumental, a heavy door clicking shut in a quiet room. "Nora, come on, don't be dramatic," Arthur called out, his voice dropping to a whisper as a waiter passed by carrying a tray of empty glasses. "I'll see you at home. We'll talk about it tomorrow. It's just business." She didn't look back. She walked down the long, carpeted corridor, her mismatched clearance rack heels sinking into the plush fabric. Her ankles screamed. Her chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean by a dull knife. She wasn't angry yet. She was just incredibly, deeply tired. She pushed open the heavy brass doors leading to the lobby, the muffled sounds of the ballroom fading away, replaced by the hushed, cavernous silence of the hotel entrance. The hotel lobby was a stark contrast to the sweaty desperation of the ballroom. It was vast, dominated by a massive crystal chandelier that looked like frozen rain casting a pristine, icy light over the marble floors. Nora walked toward the cloakroom, shivering, as a draft from the revolving glass doors hit her bare shoulders. "Ticket, miss?" the attendant asked. He was a young kid, maybe 20, with a smattering of acne across his cheeks. He looked bored. Nora rummaged in her small clutch, her fingers numb. She pulled out the crumpled slip of paper and handed it over. She leaned against the dark wood of the counter, resting her forehead on the cool palm of her hand. She closed her eyes. She just needed a minute. 1 minute to figure out how she was going to pack her things when she got to the apartment. The marriage was over. She knew it with the absolute certainty of gravity. You don't come back from being dismissed like a lingering cold. "Here you go, miss." Nora opened her eyes and took the cheap wool peacoat. It was already pilling at the sleeves. She threw it over her shoulders, relishing the worn, familiar weight of it. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the lobby shifted. It wasn't a sound, but a physical change in air pressure. The bored bellhops straightened up, snapping their hands behind their backs. The concierge, a haughty man who had ignored Nora when she arrived, abandoned his desk and practically sprinted toward the entrance. Outside, visible through the towering glass walls, a convoy of 3 sleek black SUVs pulled to a stop at the curb. The valet staff scrambled backward, clearing a path. Nora stepped away from the cloakroom, her curiosity momentarily cutting through the thick fog of her misery. She watched as a man in a dark suit stepped out of the lead vehicle, scanning the perimeter with the sharp, mechanical efficiency of private security. He opened the rear door of the middle SUV. From the hallway behind Nora, heavy footsteps pounded against the marble. "Move, move, out of the way!" a frantic voice hissed. Nora was shoved roughly in the shoulder, stumbling forward a few steps and nearly twisting her ankle in the tight heels. She caught herself on a marble pillar, looking back in shock. It was Arthur. He was flanked by Beatrice's husband and 3 other senior executives. Arthur was hyperventilating aggressively, yanking down the cuffs of his shirt, his eyes wide with a frantic, terrified energy. He hadn't even realized he was the one who pushed her. He didn't see her at all. He was staring fixedly at the revolving doors. "Is it him?" Arthur stammered, addressing the red-faced executive. "They said he wasn't coming. They said he was in London." "Shut up, Arthur, and stand up straight," the executive hissed. "If he looks at you, you nod. You do not speak unless he speaks to you." Nora touched her shoulder where Arthur had shoved her. A cold, dark irony began to bubble up in her chest. She looked toward the doors. Stepping through the revolving glass was an old man. He didn't look like a titan of industry. He didn't have the slick, polished veneer of the men in the ballroom. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that hung slightly loose on his aging frame, leaning heavily on a walking cane, topped with a worn, polished silver wolf's head. His hair was sparse and snow-white, his face carved with deep, harsh lines. But it was his eyes that controlled the room, sharp pale blue, missing absolutely nothing. He smelled faintly of old paper peppermint and a very specific discontinued brand of Cuban cigar. Nora's breath hitched in her throat. The smell hit her like a physical blow to the stomach, instantly teleporting her back 15 years. She was 10 years old again, hiding under a massive mahogany desk, listening to that exact cane tap rhythmically against the hardwood floor. It was Conrad Hayes, the founder of Hayes Global, the unseen puppet master who owned the firm Arthur worked for, along with half the real estate in the city. He was also her grandfather. Conrad paused just inside the lobby, the hotel manager hovering anxiously at his elbow like a terrified bird. The old man's pale eyes swept over the line of executives. Arthur was practically vibrating with sycophantic tension, bowing his head slightly, offering a trembling, eager smile. Conrad's gaze slid past Arthur without a millimeter of recognition. He dismissed the entire row of men as if they were decorative plants. His eyes kept moving. Then they stopped, Nora stood by the marble pillar, her cheap wool coat pulled tight around her clearance rack dress, her hair slightly messy from the night's humidity. She didn't bow her head. She didn't smile. She just stared at the old man, her heart hammering a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. Conrad Hayes froze. The heavy silver cane paused in midair. For a second, the fearsome titan of industry vanished, replaced by an old, fragile man who looked as though he had just seen a ghost. The harsh lines of his face softened his mouth, opening slightly in silent shock. In the dead quiet of the lobby, Arthur finally noticed where the billionaire was looking. He turned his head, his eyes widening in horror as he saw Nora standing there. "Nora!" Arthur hissed a panicked, furious whisper that carried across the marble floor. He took a step toward her, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What are you still doing here? I told you to leave. Get out before you embarrass me in front of Mr. Hayes." Arthur reached out his hand, wrapping aggressively around Nora's forearm, attempting to yank her toward the side exit, trying to sweep his messy wife out of the billionaire's line of sight. "Take your hands off her." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was gravelly quiet and carried the absolute, unquestionable weight of a man who could destroy lives with a single signature. The entire lobby seemed to stop breathing. Arthur froze, his fingers still clamped around Nora's arm. He turned slowly, the color completely draining from his face. Conrad Hayes pushed past the trembling hotel manager. He didn't walk toward the line of bowing executives. He walked straight toward Arthur and Nora, the silver cane striking the marble with loud, echoing clacks. Arthur immediately let go of Nora as if she had caught fire. He stumbled back, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of apology. "Mr. Hayes, sir, I am so sorry. She was just leaving. My wife, she's not feeling well. She doesn't know protocol." Conrad ignored him. He stepped squarely in front of Nora, his tall frame blocking out the rest of the room. He didn't look at her cheap coat. He didn't look at her scuffed shoes. He looked directly into her eyes, his own pale blue ones suddenly shining with an unshed ancient grief. Slowly, deliberately, the billionaire lowered his cane. He placed both his weathered hands on the silver wolf's head, heavily leaned his weight onto it, and bowed his head forward. It wasn't a nod. It was a deep, reverent bow. "Eleanor," Conrad whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, imperfect emotion that shattered the silence of the room. "You've been gone too long. It is time to come home." Nobody breathed. The silence in the lobby wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a physical pressure sucking the oxygen from the room. The only sound was the faint rhythmic whir of the revolving doors spinning uselessly behind the billionaire's back. Nora stared down at the top of her grandfather's white head. She felt a bizarre, hysterical urge to laugh. She had spent 6 years hiding from this man. She had changed her name, blocked her trust, learned how to budget for groceries using coupons, and endured the sneers of women like Beatrice Miller, all to escape the crushing gravity of the Hayes empire. And here it was, kneeling on the cold marble of the Beaumont Hotel, wearing a bespoke suit. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt sick. She looked past Conrad's bowed form. Arthur was standing exactly where he had stopped his hand, still hovering in the air where he had grabbed her. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes darted from Conrad to Nora, then back again. His brain wired entirely for corporate hierarchy, and social leverage was violently short-circuiting. "Mr. Hayes," Arthur choked out. His voice sounded like it was coming from a very small, very frightened child. "Sir, there's There's been a misunderstanding. This is Nora. She's a nurse. We live in Queens." Conrad slowly straightened up. His joints popped audibly in the quiet room. He leaned his weight back onto the silver wolf's head, his pale eyes finally shifting away from Nora to lock onto Arthur. The vulnerability that had been there a moment ago vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying emptiness. "A misunderstanding," Conrad repeated. The words rasped against the marble. "Yes, I believe there has been." The red-faced executive, Beatrice's husband Nora, remembered dully, stepped forward, his face completely drained of blood. "Mr. Hayes, I can assure you whatever this man has done, the firm does not condone." Conrad didn't even look at him. He merely raised 2 fingers of his left hand. The gesture was tiny, almost imperceptible, but the executive snapped his mouth shut so fast his teeth clicked. "Eleanor," Conrad said, softly turning back to her. He didn't reach for her. He knew better. He had always known her boundaries, even if he constantly tried to buy his way around them. "Your coat is wet, and those shoes are destroying your arches. I can see it in your posture." Nora looked down at her scuffed heels. The pain was still there, a sharp throbbing against her blistered skin, but it felt distant now. An echo. "I bought them on sale," Nora said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the emotion she knew he was looking for. 3 years ago, Conrad's jaw tightened. A flicker of genuine pain crossed his eyes. "My car is outside, please." She looked at him. Really looked at him. He had aged 10 years in the 6 since she'd seen him. The skin around his neck was creepy, and his hands trembled slightly where they gripped the cane. He was an old man facing the end of his life, desperate to reclaim the only piece of his legacy he actually cared about. But he was also the man who had fired her first boyfriend, bought the hospital where she wanted to intern just to control her schedule, and systematically tried to sterilize her world of any risk or heartbreak. Then she looked back at Arthur. Arthur had taken a step toward her. His face was a horrifying mask of desperate calculation. The panic was still there, but beneath it, Nora could see the gears turning. He was putting the pieces together. Hayes Global, Eleanor, the grandfather. She could practically see the dollar signs violently overwriting the disdain he had held for her 10 minutes ago. "Nora," Arthur whispered. He reached out a hand. It was shaking. "Honey, what is happening?" "Honey." 10 minutes ago, she was an embarrassment he needed to hide so he could flirt with a logistics heiress. Now she was his golden ticket. The revulsion hit her so hard she almost physically stumbled. It tasted like bile and old champagne. She realized with a profound, quiet horror that she hadn't escaped the transactional nature of her family's world at all. She had just traded Conrad's billion-dollar manipulations for Arthur's petty, pathetic ones. She had willingly put herself in a smaller, cheaper cage. Nora pulled her cheap wool peacoat tighter around her shoulders. She looked Arthur dead in the eye. "I don't have the vocabulary for this," she said. She turned away from her husband, the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed her 20s to support. She didn't look back. She walked past the gaping executives, past the terrified hotel manager, and toward the revolving doors. Conrad Hayes followed her, his heavy silver cane matching her steps, the private security parting like the Red Sea to let them through. Rain had begun to fall, smearing the neon lights of the city across the tinted glass of the SUV. Nora sat perfectly still in the back seat. The interior of the car was cavernous, smelling heavily of conditioned leather ozone and that same faint trace of peppermint. The seats were buttery soft molding to her spine, actively heating against the damp chill of her dress. It was a stark, jarring contrast to the rattling subway cars and cramped Ubers she had spent the last 6 years navigating. Conrad sat beside her, staring out his own window. He hadn't spoken since they got in. The silence was thick, but it wasn't the aggressive, punishing silence Arthur used when he was disappointed in her. It was a heavy, cautious quiet. The silence of a man walking through a minefield. Nora unclasped her clutch. Her fingers felt stiff. She stared at the cheap faux leather in her lap, then at the heavy soundproof glass separating them from the driver. "I'm not coming back to the company," she said to the darkness. Conrad didn't turn his head. "I didn't ask you to. I'm not moving back into the East Wing. The West Wing was always yours anyway. Better light in the mornings." Nora closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the headrest. The sheer exhaustion was beginning to set in, settling into her bones like lead. "Don't play games, Grandpa. I don't have the energy for it. I'm only here because the alternative was standing in that lobby and watching Arthur try to figure out how to monetize our marriage certificate." A harsh, dry sound escaped Conrad's throat. It took Nora a second to realize it was a laugh. "He is a remarkably small man," Conrad murmured, finally turning to look at her. The streetlights washed over his face, highlighting the deep grooves around his mouth. "I read the file on him when you first ran off. Arthur Vance. Middle-class upbringing, decent education, absolutely staggering inferiority complex. He was always going to resent you, Eleanor, whether you were penniless or a billionaire. Men like that don't want partners. They want mirrors that make them look taller." Nora's chest tightened. She hated that he was right. She hated that this old man who evaluated human beings the way he evaluated stock portfolios had seen through her marriage 6 years before she did. "You didn't have to humiliate him," Nora muttered, though there was no real heat in it. "I didn't do anything to him," Conrad said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I merely walked into a room. He humiliated himself. He threw you away to chase table scraps, not realizing he was already sitting at the feast." He paused, his pale eyes narrowing. "Why didn't you tell him what?" Nora snapped, a spark of defensive anger, finally cutting through the numbness. "That my name is Eleanor Hayes, that my trust fund could buy his entire firm. What would that have changed, Conrad? He would have just used me, just like you used people." Conrad didn't flinch. He absorbed the blow with the stoicism of a man who had survived worse. "Perhaps," he conceded quietly. "But I used people to build an empire that would protect you. He used you to buy a slightly nicer suit. There is a difference in scale, if not in morality." Nora turned away, staring out at the blurring city. The rain was coming down harder now, drumbeats against the reinforced roof. She reached down and slipped off the clearance rack heels. The relief was immediate and agonizing as blood rushed back into her compressed toes. She let the shoes drop onto the plush floor mats. "I need a divorce lawyer," she said simply. "Done," Conrad replied without missing a beat. "Donovan is already drawing up the papers. They will be airtight. He will not get a single cent of Hayes' money, nor will he keep whatever pathetic savings you managed to scrape together for him." Nora rubbed her temples. The efficiency of it all was terrifying. She had forgotten how fast the world moved when you had unlimited capital. Problems weren't solved. They were simply deleted. "Just make it fast," she whispered. "I don't want to see him. I don't want to hear his voice." "You won't have to," Conrad promised. The tone was absolute. A decree. The SUV turned off the main road, the tires crunching onto the long, crushed gravel driveway of the Hayes estate. The massive wrought iron gates swung open automatically. As they glided up toward the imposing lit facade of the main house, Nora felt a suffocating sense of déjà vu. She was back. The velvet cage had swung open and she had walked right back inside. But as the car rolled to a stop and the driver opened the door to the crisp night air, Nora realized something fundamental had changed. She wasn't the naive 22-year-old running away from her privilege anymore. She had lived in the real world. She had felt the sting of poverty, the exhaustion of double shifts, and the bitter grinding reality of conditional love. She stepped out of the car in her bare feet, her toes sinking into the wet gravel. She didn't care about the cold. She didn't care about the ruined dress. Conrad stepped out beside her, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at her bare feet, but didn't say a word. "I'm staying in the West Wing," Nora said, not looking at him. "Nobody comes in without knocking, and you don't screen my calls." Conrad smiled. It was a small, tired thing, but it reached his eyes. "Understood. Sunlight is unforgiving when you haven't slept." It poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the estate's library, illuminating the floating dust motes and the rich, polished spines of thousands of unread books. Nora sat in a high-backed leather chair, a mug of black coffee cooling in her hands. The smell of the roasting beans mixed with the lemon oil used on the wood, paneling the exact scent of Sunday mornings from her childhood. She wore a thick cashmere sweater and linen trousers. The clothes belonged to her technically left behind in her old closets, but they felt like costumes. They didn't scratch or pinch. They just draped perfectly. The heavy oak doors of the library clicked open. "Ma'am," the butler, a new man she didn't recognize, murmured softly. "Mr. Vance is here." Nora's stomach gave a familiar, pathetic flutter, but she stamped it out ruthlessly. "Bring him in." Arthur walked into the room a moment later. Nora almost didn't recognize him. The polished, ambitious climber from the ballroom was gone. In his place was a man unraveling at the seams. His tuxedo shirt was heavily wrinkled and untucked. He had clearly slept in his suit, if he had slept at all. His hair was greasy, sticking up in strange angles, and the dark circles under his eyes looked like bruises. He stopped just inside the doorway, his eyes darting frantically around the cavernous, opulent library, before finally settling on Nora. He swallowed hard. The sound was audible across the room. "Nora," he breathed. He took a hesitant step forward, like a dog expecting to be kicked. "Nora, baby, please." Nora didn't move. She didn't invite him to sit. She just watched him over the rim of her coffee mug. The power dynamic in the room was so heavily skewed, it almost made her nauseous. Yesterday she had been a nuisance he had to shoo away into a taxi. Today she was sitting in a room worth more than his firm's entire annual revenue, holding his complete destruction in her hands. "Don't call me baby," she said quietly. Arthur flinched. He stopped walking, his hands twisting nervously in front of him. I didn't know. I swear to God, Nora, I had no idea. You never said. 6 years and you never told me you were..." He gestured weakly at the room at the estate. "You're a Hayes. I told you I left my family because they were controlling..." Nora said, her voice remaining perfectly level. "I told you I wanted to build a life on my own terms. You just never asked for their names. You were too busy talking about yourself." Arthur looked at the floor. The rich Persian rug seemed to fascinate him. "I was an idiot last night. I was stressed. That Bingham account. It was my whole quarter, Nora. I panicked. I said things I didn't mean. You told me to leave my own husband's corporate party so you could pretend to be single and flirt with a client. Nora recited cleanly as if reading from a grocery list. You shoved me in a hallway. You were embarrassed by my dress. The dress I bought off the clearance rack because we had to put my nursing salary toward your student loans. I'll pay you back, Arthur burst out, taking another step forward. His eyes were wide, pleading. I swear, Nora, every cent. I was stupid, but we can fix this. We're married. We took vows. We can use this. We can finally have the life we talked about. Nora set the mug down on the side table. The ceramic clicked sharply against the wood. She looked at the man standing before her. She searched her chest for the love she had felt for him yesterday morning. She dug through the anger, the betrayal, and the deep bruising humiliation. She looked for the spark that had kept her working double shifts, the affection that had made her stay up proofreading his terrible pitch decks. There was nothing. It wasn't even hollow. It was just an autopsy table, cold and sterile. You don't get it, Arthur, she said, her voice dropping into a register that sounded chillingly like Conrad's. You aren't apologizing because you hurt your wife. You're apologizing because you insulted a billionaire. Arthur froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The truth of the statement hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. If I was just Nora, the nurse, she continued, standing up slowly, you would have come home last night, yelled at me for talking to Beatrice Miller, and demanded I make you breakfast this morning. You wouldn't be standing here shaking. You're not sorry. You're just terrified. That's not true, Arthur whispered, but his eyes betrayed him. They were darting around the room again, taking in the wealth, doing the math on what he was losing. My grandfather's lawyers will be contacting you this afternoon, Nora said, crossing her arms over her chest. They are going to hand you a divorce settlement. It will offer you absolutely nothing. You will take it and you will sign it. Panic flared in Arthur's face. The groveling vanished, replaced by the desperate, cornered ambition she knew so well. You can't do that. I'm your husband. I'm entitled to half of whatever marital assets. Arthur. Nora cut him off. She didn't shout. She just spoke his name with a flat, absolute finality. Look around you, she said softly. Look at where you are standing. If you try to fight this, if you try to drag my name through a court to get a payout, Conrad will bury you. He won't just ruin your career at the firm. He will make sure you cannot get hired at a car wash in this state. He will crush you until there is nothing left but powder. Arthur stared at her. He looked physically ill. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down on him, crushing the breath from his lungs. He wasn't playing a corporate game anymore. He was standing on the tracks, and the train was already here. You're acting just like them, he spat out, a weak, pathetic attempt at a parting shot. You think you're so much better, but you're just another rich bitch using money to hurt people. Nora didn't flinch. She felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Maybe, she said quietly, but at least my shoes fit today. She turned her back on him, picking up her coffee mug. Show yourself out, Arthur. Don't steal any of the books on your way. She didn't watch him leave. She just listened to the heavy drag of his footsteps across the Persian rug, the soft click of the oak doors closing, and the profound, unbroken silence that followed. Porcelain scraped against heavy mahogany. Dinner in the main dining room of the estate was an exercise in acoustic isolation. The ceiling was too high, absorbing the faint clinking of heavy silver forks and the soft, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Nora chewed a piece of medium-rare duck breast coated in a dark blackberry reduction. It tasted rich, complex, and overwhelmingly expensive. 3 days ago, she had eaten boxed macaroni and cheese over a chipped laminate counter, scraping the burnt bits from the bottom of an aluminum pot, because Arthur had forgotten to pay the gas bill on time. The whiplash was physical. It sat low in her gut, a heavy cold stone of guilt mixed entirely with a dark, thrilling relief. She hated that she felt relieved. For 6 years she had built her identity around rejecting this exact room. She had worn her financial struggles like a badge of moral superiority, convincing herself that poverty made her more authentic, more human. But sitting here now feeling the absolute impenetrable security of her grandfather's empire wrapping around her like a lead-lined blanket, Nora realized she had been lying to herself. Struggle wasn't noble. It was just exhausting. She liked the armor. She liked knowing she would never again have to check her bank balance before putting a carton of eggs in a grocery cart. The realization felt ugly, pragmatic, and brutally honest. Conrad sat at the opposite end of the impossibly long table. He hadn't touched his food. He was watching her, his pale eyes studying the way she held her fork, the straight line of her spine against the upholstered chair. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a thick cream-colored envelope, sliding it across the polished wood. It stopped a few inches from Nora's plate. "The board meets on Tuesdays," Conrad said. His voice was a low rumble, blending with the ticking clock. "I've had Donovan draft the paperwork to reinstate your voting shares. You can take the acquisition seat. It requires minimal travel, and you will have a full team of analysts to brief you." Nora stared at the envelope. The paper was thick enough to cut skin. It represented billions of dollars in speculative tech, overseas shipping routes, and commercial real estate. It represented the exact velvet cage she had run from at 22. She reached out, picked up the envelope, and slid it right back across the table. "No," Conrad's jaw tightened. The faint shadow of a scowl darkened his weathered face. "Eleanor, we discussed this. You are back. You cannot simply hide in the West Wing and read novels for the rest of your life. You are a Hayes. You have responsibilities." "I have capital," Nora corrected him, her voice perfectly steady. "And I am not going to use it to sit in a glass boardroom arguing with old men about fractional profit margins." She wiped her mouth with a linen napkin, folding it neatly beside her plate. "I spent the last 6 years in the South Ward, Grandpa. I know the smell of a pediatric waiting room when the AC breaks in August. I know the exact sound a mother makes when she finds out her insurance won't cover her kid's insulin. I lived down there. I scrubbed blood off the linoleum." Nora leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. "I don't want your acquisition seat. I want St. Jude's Community Clinic." Conrad frowned, his thick white eyebrows knitting together. "You want to work there again, after what just happened?" "I don't want to work there," Nora said, a cold, sharp smile touching the corners of her mouth. It was a smile she hadn't known she possessed, but it fit perfectly on her face. "I want to buy it. The building, the land it sits on, the medical supply contracts, the debt. All of it." Silence stretched between them. Conrad picked up his wineglass, swirling the dark red liquid slowly. He was recalculating. The old Titan was looking at his granddaughter and finally seeing the predator he had spent decades trying to cultivate. "The South Ward is a logistical nightmare," Conrad murmured, though there was a new, distinct hum of interest in his tone. "The real estate is depreciating. The municipal pushback on private ownership of community health centers will be fierce. I don't care, Nora said. She picked up her fork again, piercing a piece of duck. I want to restructure the administrative board. I want to double the nursing staff's salaries. And I want to personally fire the head administrator, Gregory, who has been skimming off the pharmaceutical budget for 3 years to pay for his golf club memberships. Conrad stared at her. For a long moment, the only sound was the heavy ticking of the clock. Then slowly, the old man began to laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound, scraping against the walls of the cavernous room. You want a war? Conrad chuckled, shaking his head. You don't want to be a nurse. You want to be a warlord. I want to fix things, Nora replied, chewing her food. And I've finally realized you can't fix things from the bottom up. You have to buy the ceiling and tear it down. Conrad tapped his fingers against the rim of his wineglass. The disappointment was gone entirely. In its place was a gleaming, dangerous pride. I will have Donovan set up a holding company tomorrow morning. The clinic will be yours by Friday. 3 weeks later, the air in the South Ward tasted exactly the same. It was a thick, stagnant mixture of exhaust fumes, damp concrete, and the faint, sweet scent of rotting garbage from the alleyways. Nora stepped out of the black SUV, the soles of her custom-fitted leather boots clicking softly against the cracked pavement. She wore dark slacks and a simple tailored charcoal blazer. No jewelry, nothing flashy, just the quiet, heavy fabric of absolute authority. She walked through the sliding glass doors of St. Jude's. The waiting room was packed. Fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a sickly greenish pallor over the rows of plastic chairs. A child was crying in the corner. The smell of industrial bleach barely masked the underlying scent of old sweat and copper. Nora walked past the reception desk. A young nurse looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. Nora, the nurse stammered, dropping a stack of intake forms. Wait, you can't be back here. Gregory said if you showed your face. It's fine, Sarah, Nora said softly, not breaking her stride. She pushed through the heavy double doors leading to the administrative corridor. The linoleum here was peeling at the edges, sticky underfoot. She stopped in front of the corner office. The door was frosted glass, the name Gregory Dunn, Head Administrator, stenciled in cheap black lettering. Nora didn't knock. She turned the handle and pushed the door open. Gregory was sitting behind his cluttered desk, his tie loosened, a half-eaten sandwich sitting on top of a stack of patient files. He was a thick, sweaty man with a perpetual flush to his cheeks. He looked up, his face instantly twisting into an ugly sneer. Vance, Gregory barked aggressively, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. What the hell are you doing in my office? I terminated you. You abandoned your shift for 3 days. You don't get to just waltz back in here and beg for your job. Nora closed the door behind her. The click of the latch was loud in the small, stuffy room. She walked over to his desk. She didn't yell. She didn't look angry. She just felt a profound, chilling calm. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer and pulled out a single sheet of heavy watermarked paper. She dropped it directly onto his half-eaten sandwich. My name isn't Vance anymore, Nora said, her voice dropping into the exact gravelly register her grandfather used to shatter boardrooms. And I'm not begging for a shift. Gregory scowled, picking up the paper with grease-stained fingers. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, the bolded holding company name, and the final sweeping signature at the bottom. The color rapidly drained from his flushed cheeks, leaving him looking pale and sickly in the fluorescent light. He looked up at her, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. This says you own the building. Gregory stammered, the paper trembling in his hands. "This says Hayes Holdings. Pack your desk, Gregory," Nora said. She didn't blink. She just watched his world collapse in real-time, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, necessary satisfaction. "You have exactly 15 minutes before my security team physically removes you from my clinic. If I find out you've taken a single pen that belongs to this hospital, I will have my lawyers audit your personal finances for the last 10 years. Gregory sat frozen, entirely unable to process the terrifying stranger, standing in the clothes of the quiet, exhausted nurse he used to bully. Nora didn't wait for him to speak. She turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door wide open. She stepped back into the chaotic, buzzing hallway of the clinic. A doctor was running past, calling for a crash cart. The intercom was blaring a chaotic string of numbers. It was loud, messy, and fundamentally broken. Nora took a deep breath, letting the scent of bleach and raw humanity fill her lungs. Her marriage was a corpse. Her past was a lie. Her hands were no longer clean-stained with the exact kind of ruthless power she had always feared. But as she looked down the corridor, mentally calculating the cost of a new MRI machine and a total renovation of the pediatric wing, Nora smiled. The cage was gone. She held the keys now, and she was going to build something entirely her own. Did Nora make the right choice? Or did she just trade one prison for another? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. If this story of raw ambition, betrayal, and reclaiming power kept you hooked, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with someone who loves a dark, dramatic twist, and subscribe to our channel for more deeply human stories. Your support keeps these tales coming.